I'm Tom Patterson. I'm one of the co-founders of Boston Global Forum, and I'm in my office at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I'm a Bradley Professor of Government Press, and I direct the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. And I'm joined today by Professor J.D. Bindenagel, former ambassador, who is the Henry Kissinger Professor at the University of Bonn, and also by Matthew Smith, also from the University of Bonn, in the Computer Science Department. And the Boston Global Forum, a few months ago, put out its Ethics Code of Conduct for Cyber Security and Peace. It's an attempt to put down some norms, some conventions for behavior of those in cyberspace. It speaks to the business community, it speaks to policymakers, institutions and educators, net citizens. And I wanted to start by asking JD and Matthew, what's the value of ethical norms or conventions in this area of cybersecurity?
So James, do you want to go first?
Either one. My question to both JD and Matthew, and either of you can join in.
Okay, so since James seems to have just dropped out, I'll go. I think an ethical code of conduct is absolutely vital and something we as a community need to focus a lot more on, because there's a growing gulf between the two kind of sides in kind of cybersecurity. We have the surveillance side, trying to protect our physical safety through the means of surveillance, and then we have the cybersecurity side, trying to create systems which are so secure that surveillance is no longer possible. And the front between these two sides is getting more extreme, and it is being discussed on a level which is fairly far removed from any ethical considerations. And I think maybe if we can bring the conversation down that route, we'll be able to find common ground a lot more easily.
So JD, I don't know whether you've joined us, but the question that I put that Matthew had a response to was kind of where do ethical codes of conduct, norms, conventions, where do these fit into the effort to deal with cyber terrorism, cybersecurity, and the like? So, Matthew, I guess it's you and I for the moment, and we'll try to plug Jake back in here. You know, I think in the international sphere, I mean, we're actually fairly accustomed to relying on norms and conventions. There is no sovereign authority in the international space, particularly, and you know, we depend on nations and other actors in the international system to kind of comply with international law, with informal guidelines, with norms, conventions, and the like. What are the key enforcement mechanisms? I mean, how do we really put some teeth into a code of conduct?
Well, so I feel that, of course, is a question which James would be a lot better at answering than I mean, so I come from the technical side of things, and maybe the technical problem side in your question is that since the tech community is global, and can create systems which are probably secure enough to prevent surveillance in a fair amount of cases. The question is if governments can actually regulate things in a way that they can achieve what they want, or if they actually do more harm than good. So for example, let's say governments would want to regulate that they get a backdoor into our cryptographic systems, like we see in the FBI and Apple case. They can do that within national borders. So they could go to the American company and say, we will force you to do this for us. However, then the international community would go ahead and say, well, we don't want to use that kind of system, and would simply migrate to a product which is outside of the US government's control. So actually getting legal traction in this space is probably going to be very tricky, because it is so easy for digital goods to be moved into jurisdictions where certain rules don't apply. So I think it's very important that we actually try and get a constructive dialogue going, that we can work together without the need of teeth to enforce things, because I fear the more tightly people try and close their grip on this, the more things will slip away.
JD, have you joined us?
Yeah, I've come back. I don't know what's happening here, but
So I don't know how much of what I said earlier you were able to hear, but so let me back it up a little bit and ask you the two questions that I've asked Matthew. You know, as you know, the Boston Global Forum developed ethics code of conduct for cyber peace and security, and my opening question was, what role do ethical codes, norms, conventions play in this effort to achieve a higher level of cybersecurity?
well, Tom, I think the most important thing in the first instance is that these codes of conduct or principles guide the development of law. As Matthew was saying there, we need to move to law, but to get to law, you need to have first principles. So I think the codes play an extremely important role. As you can see from the competition that's going on with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the EU, and others are trying to define what the kinds of issues are that Matthew's outlined. And those codes of conduct discussions are really critical in developing a consensus around what is acceptable, not acceptable, defining the issues, and then it goes into actually international law, and that's why I think the most important thing of the debate itself.
So let me follow that up. The Boston Global Forum has recently developed a document which summarizes some of the important codes of conduct that are out there, including the Boston Global Forum's own ECCC, but also that of for example, the G20, to be submitted possibly at the G7 summit meeting in May.
That is actually,
what role do you think an organization like the G7 can play in trying to extend these codes of conduct, these norms, these conventions?
I would see the logical progression is through the individual, the Shanghai Cooperation, the European Union ones, the Boston Global Forum, into the G20, and then eventually into the United Nations. And what we did with the Holocaust issues, the post-conflict justice issues in Chicago, was we created a document called the Chicago Principles on Post-Conflict Justice, and filed that with the United Nations as a way to bring the international community together on a set of principles. And that I think is a similar kind of process that would be very helpful in developing the international discussion, but then moving to an international code of conduct, code of ethics that comes with the United Nations. So, otherwise, you have individual countries or regions making their own rules, and then there's conflict, and that builds conflict that will not be resolved easily.
So, Matthew, I should ask whether you have some thoughts to add on the G7 possibility?
So I agree with James that we need to find a forum which has a wide enough reach that if enough people agree on these things, it will have a broad base of support. But I would like to reiterate the problem that it is very easy, if there are pockets of different thought, that they can create products which will then not conform to those code of conduct, and then the people we don't like are free to use that. So if we kind of when thinking about the total direction of
It sounds like we've lost the connection. Is that right?
I think so, JD. I think Matthew. I think that connection is off. So,
but I think he raises a very important point that in the political discussion of codes of conduct and activities, you have to bring in the technical side, as you can see in the FBI's argument with Apple over the terrorist telephone. The technical side sets the perimeters around which one can cross or not cross, and I think having somebody like Professor Smith here talking about what the technical side is and bringing them into the code of conduct discussion is important to actually have a reality check, if you will. Are you there again, Matt?
Let's continue on this line, JD. So, when we talk about the G7, we're talking about kind of the leaders of the free world, if we could use that term, or the democracies. And this is at the very top, of course. This is summit level meeting. And so the question is sort of, you think about the G7 and you think about some of the other organizations. But anyway, there's a lot of entities, including nations, outside the G7. Obviously, the tech community, to some degree, as Matthew described that community, is an international, a global community that to some degree operates outside of borders. Clearly, China, to some degree, is a big player here, not part of the G7. Do you think that the G7, if it should do something substantial in this area, that it would have influence that would reach into some of these other areas?
I think that's really very important. You need a venue where the other elements of or if you will, the stakeholders that are out there. Of course, as pointed out, there are also stakeholders who are not willing to be part of that process because they're either criminals or terrorists or others. And so it's even more important that those in governments and regions have a forum, and I think this is why I think the Boston Global Forum contribution here is to reach out to people in Asia and Europe and other places so that you have a broader base dialogue and more of a convergence in what is necessary and what is doable.
So, JD, you have a lot of experience in situations like this. I just want to ask you a little bit about the strategy. So, when one thinks about trying to establish norms and conventions, does one kind of begin with the ones that are kind of easiest for people to buy into and use that as a first step, and then kind of go out from there to the more difficult issues, or do you come at this thing comprehensively from the beginning? How does one think about, I think lots of different organizations have come up with some terrific ideas of what would be in a code of conduct. I think the operational question is kind of where do you start and how do you make it progress in a way where, in fact, you get buy-in and ultimately you achieve some of the goals that you've talked about, working some of these conventions into law and the like.
In my negotiating experience, let me just take, since you have a German and American here with you today, this is a fundamental cultural problem. Matthew, allow me, if you will, to describe the German approach to negotiations is a dialectical approach, a Hegelian approach, if you will, that seeks to do a comprehensive approach and present it as the solution, where, Tom, as you noted, the American point of view is really to find elements of consensus and build on those consensus to a certain level. I think that's a conflict that reflects itself in the negotiations that happens anyway. And the only way to deal with this is to be open and have both the comprehensive approach presented and then work from there into the individual consensus elements that can be agreed upon with an open-ended process. So that's what I've done in my negotiating history, particularly with the Germans, but others, to ensure that you have both sides presenting and then work on what is actually sustainable, but never letting the process end. I know that drives my German friends crazy, but that's a strategy that really does work. So in this case, starting off with a comprehensive approach that the Boston Global Forum has put in a whole comprehensive approach that also takes into contact the issues of technical issues as well as the political issues and where you want to be in values, that you then have a debate about, okay, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And I think you can do that in various fora. The Boston Global Forum is an open forum. You can do it in specific forums like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that you try to get into that discussion. In the EU with the cyber security strategy, in the business community, and as Matthew has noted here, in the technical community. There are various places where you can enter in conversation.
So Matthew, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. So the tech community is really important to making progress in this area. What do nation states, I mean, kind of policymakers at the top level, what kinds of things do they need to do to bring the technology side into the conversations and in a meaningful way? I think that's critical as well. I mean, just to have them kind of there and on the sidelines to a degree, that never works in the long run. So what would it take to bring the technology community more fully into these conversations?
Sounds like we've lost you. Matthew, are you there?
I think I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We couldn't hear you, but go ahead, Matthew.
I'm here, and I heard you. Tom, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I think the relationship between nation states and the community hasn't damaged in recent years due to the spying revelation.
Yeah.
Right.
So the two sides were working quite well in fashion, and they are working together with the tech community and not against it. Now, the revelations of Edward Snowden show very clearly that was not the case. So particularly the NSA has invested substantial effort at attacking the very core of the tech community. So they have had undercover agents subvert the standardization process of cryptographic protocols, weakening them in such a way that they could be attacked. And that, of course, is something which many in the tech community see as a betrayal of trust. So we were working together with government agencies, and I think in the free world, we all want to have a safe and prosperous and free environment. But now there's the feeling that the trust has been broken, and the tech community is now saying, well, we do not want mass surveillance. We do not want things to be done in this kind of way. So they're now creating products which are locking out even the governments. I mean, there's still enough holes where they can get in, but the mindset has changed. The mindset now is we are defending not only against criminals, but we are defending against the surveillance state. And I see that in my own work. In the year before Edward Snowden's revelations, I created a security system which was more usable than the others, on the premise that governments were not completely overreaching their capabilities. And I said, well, and since the governments we're thinking about aren't doing that, we should be fine. That's something I've now abandoned and say, well, obviously that is not something we can assume. And I think that's very counterproductive, because I think we fundamentally are on the same side. More step back and try and come to a negotiation table which has ethics at its core, because both sides, I think, are doing damage. I think total surveillance will be a mistake for our society, but I also think complete privacy will have very bad effects on our society.
I think that, Matthew, you described very well the concern and the process of getting out of the difficulty of not having trust is to begin to sit down with a code of ethics, which the Boston Global Forum is actually doing, and then work towards both sides to have a transparent discussion about what it is that's important. So the case of San Bernardino and the telephone, breaking open that is a very good example of the two sides are not coming together. How does the tech community then engage with in this case, a criminal case, and make its case in a public way that promotes the discussion, not in a court of law.
So, I think we have time for one more subject of discussion. This is an international problem. It's a global problem. It's not a regional problem. It's not a problem just for wealthy nations. In some ways, it's a little bit like the climate change problem. And if you look at the history of the international effort to deal with the climate change issue, early on at least, I think the international community has seen the problem with it. Kind of the developing countries were left out of the discussion early on. What part do they have to play in this discussion, and sort of what kind of obligation toward the developing world does the developed world, where most of this technology resides, what's the responsibility, and what's the role for developing countries in this issue area?
Matthew, I turn to you. Fundamental question. What are the technical capabilities for developing countries? Are they for users and therefore subject to others making decisions, or are they in the decision-making process?
So this is an absolutely fascinating question and a really nice analogy. So while with global warming,
yeah. We want to hear your answer. It says it's good.
So I think maybe we've lost Matthew here. So JD, we're in our closing minutes of our issue discussion. Do you have some final thoughts before we close off?
is
I
very
would,
much the
Matthew, are you there? Well, I must say this is a critical issue that there's so many players now, and there's so many levels from the criminal side, the cyber security issues and security that I'm dealing with, the technical issues. This is a very critical time to have this debate. In fact, on June 14th or so, Matthew and I and two others, one from Telecom and another, having the global media forum of the Deutsche Welle here and continuing this conversation. So we will pick up some of these issues and bring them into how the Boston Global Forum is working them and to promote that debate. It's much more prominent in the Munich Security Conference that's going on. So I think what we see with the Boston Global Forum is very much in the middle of what is a critical debate.
JD, thank you. I want to thank both Professor JD Bindenagel and Professor Matthew Smith from Bonn for participating in this discussion. I suppose there's a certain irony that we're talking about, technology here, and we're having difficulties with our own technology. But I promise you, this is an ongoing series. We'll be coming back to the issue again and again with different people. And between now and the next, we'll do our very best to fix the technology problem on our end. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it. And Matthew, thanks for doing that too. Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.